The morning sun hovered low over Lake Ridge Military Base, casting elongated shadows across the weathered asphalt that led to the main entrance. It was Veterans Day once more, and the temperature had dipped to 39 degrees Fahrenheit, a crisp chill that stirred the final rust-tinted leaves along the east perimeter fence. Beneath a maple tree whose roots had witnessed decades of ceremonies and farewells, Harold Whitaker paused, hat in hand, breath visible in the frigid air. His Columbia parka hung open just enough to reveal a rust-colored flannel shirt tucked into well-worn khaki pants, each crease pressed with precision. In his right hand he carried a wooden walking stick, smooth and polished, from years of use, its handle etched with the emblem of the U.S. Army's 1st Cavalry Division. Under his left arm lay a slim envelope sealed tight, its front inscribed in neat script, "To the families of the fallen Veterans Day 2025. Harold's fedora, a deep burgundy felt model he'd purchased while stationed at Fort Knox in the mid-1960s, sat lightly upon his head brim, curving downward to shade eyes whose lines told stories no photograph could capture. Though his hair had long since surrendered to silver, his posture remained erect, shoulders squared, even after nearly 6 decades of life's burdens. He took a steadying breath and recalled the acrid smoke of Saigon's outskirts, the sound of choppers slicing humid air as they lifted wounded comrades to safety, and the hush that followed mortar, blasts and echo that still reverberated inside him. Approaching the gate, Harold extended his hand to Staff Sergeant Caleb Richards, a 28-year-old guard with a crisp haircut and the posture of a man trained to dismiss any disturbance. "Good morning, Sergeant," Harold said softly, voice steady but imbued with a quiet authority. He handed over a laminated identification card, its edges frayed, the plastic cloudy with years of handling. Richards examined the card under the morning light. He murmured, barely containing a smirk. "Apparently expired in 1985, he said, holding it up so his fellow guards could see. Two others, Lance Corporal Jenna Park and Corporal Miguel Dominguez, leaned forward, eyebrows raised. "You're not serious, right?" Park asked, laughter creeping into her tone. "That ID looks like it survived a flood." Harold pressed his lips together, nodding once. He did not speak further. His grip tightened on the envelope as he waited beneath the fluttering American flag, its stars and stripes rippling in a gentle breeze. The snow-kissed pines beyond the chain-link fence stood silent, as if honoring the moment's wait. Corporal Dominguez tapped the ID against the guard booth's metal frame. "Ma'am, this is clearly invalid. If you want to get inside, you'll need to visit the Veterans Museum down the road. No valid credentials, no entry." His chuckle echoed through the small cluster of guards. From inside the booth, Master Sergeant Linda Caldwell peeked through the sliding window, sipping from a travel mug. "Let me guess, another hero looking for a free ride," she quipped, voice tinged with skepticism. The guards laughed again, one pretending to fold arms theatrically, another mimicking driving a tank. Harold stood motionless, unbothered by their ridicule. He extended his right hand to take back the card. Richard shrugged and leaned forward, returning it with a dismissive flick. "Sorry, sir," he said with forced politeness. "No valid ID, no entry. But we'll gladly direct you to the museum." Harold inclined his head then turned toward the parking lot. Each step carried the echo of generations, men and women who marched to battlefields remembered by few. He walked 8 feet to an oak bench, its surface etched with initials dating back to the 1940s. There he sat, placing his fedora gently in his lap. Breathing slowly, he closed his eyes, leaning back to feel the sun's weak warmth on his face. Behind the guard booth, Lance Corporal Park shook her head. "I didn't catch half of that ID. Looked like it's from some Civil War reenactment." Corporal Dominguez snorted. "Yeah, and he probably fought under Teddy Roosevelt himself." They laughed again, skipping across the thin layer of frost on the pavement. But Master Sergeant Caldwell remained silent, her gaze returning to Harold's still form beneath the oak. Something in that calm posture unsettled her, a notion unspoken that a life lived in service could not be dismissed so easily. Harold lifted his head, noticing fresh snow settling along the bench's grain. He traced a finger along a carved heart from 40 years prior, engraved by a soldier in the Vietnam War for his sweetheart. A feathered breeze stirred the surface of the lake beyond the base perimeter, carrying the faint scent of evergreen. He allowed himself one small melancholy smile, recalling the faces of those he had once led into firefights and rescue operations. The laughter at the gate would linger for a moment, then recede, leaving behind the hush that fell when a soldier's dues demanded to be recognized. In the stillness, a pair of headlights glinted on the access road, an unmarked black SUV approaching slowly, its engine hum subdued. Harold's breath quickened, not from urgency, but from the quiet anticipation that drifted through the winter air. He rose from the bench, walking carefully until his cane touched the pavement. The envelope remained clasped to his side, a silent reminder of promises spanning half a century. As he gazed toward the guard booth, where the ribbons of mocking laughter still hung in the air, Harold Whitaker felt the familiar stirrings of memory-lost duty and a dignity that refused to fade. The road ahead was uncertain, but he would not falter. His morning was far from over. History was waiting to unfold. Harold Whitaker returned to the oak bench, settling beneath its frost-kissed branches as the mid-morning sun climbed toward 45 degrees Fahrenheit. He closed his eyes, briefly recalling events he had hoped to leave behind: a fuel explosion at Fort Douglas in 1974, the ranks of injured he'd carried one by one, and the silent prayers he whispered for each comrade lost to the flames. The envelope tucked against his side felt heavier now, pressed between the stark reality of today's contempt and the weight of duty he had felt during every mission. From the guard booth, Lance Corporal Jenna Park and Corporal Miguel Dominguez persisted in their banter, unaware of the unease creeping through Master Sergeant Caldwell's expression. They compared Harold's gait to that of a wobbly mailman making his rounds, cruel jabs that faded into half-truths and hyperbole. But Caldwell's silence grew, her pale blue eyes narrowing as she replayed memories of an older man from her own childhood, a hero of the Gulf War named Thomas Reed, whose quiet sacrifice had only become known years later. On the base's northern perimeter, Petty Officer First Class Mark Ellis prepared breakfast in the galley. The steady clatter of spatulas and pots masked the soft exhale of the base's daily routine. A young ensign wandered in, mentioning the veteran who'd tried to enter the gate. "They say he had an ID from the Carter administration," the ensign joked. Ellis paused, spatula hovering over steaming grits. Something in the description tugged at a memory, an old Marine who once appeared at their doorstep when Ellis was a boy delivering care packages to families whose sons were deployed. "That sounds like Harold Whitaker," Ellis murmured, voice low. The ensign blinked. "You know him," Ellis nodded, leaning against the counter. "He once helped save my big brother's platoon from a sandstorm in '91. Didn't say a word. Just showed up, led them to safety." The ensign paled, glancing toward the guard booth through the kitchen window. "He's alive," yes, Ellis said quietly. "But he's been traveling this path every Veterans Day since '92. Delivers letters to families of men who didn't come home." He turned back to cooking, voice hushed. "He didn't have to. He did it because no one else would." Back beneath the oak, a gentle flurry began, first a few flakes, then a steady snowfall. They drifted onto Harold's hatless head, melting against his silver hair. He watched them fall, each flake, a reminder of friends whose names vanished under layers of time. Private First Class Rebecca Snyder arrived with a clipboard, scanning for tardy recruits. She paused on the path leading to the booth, spotting Harold's still form under the tree. At 23, Rebecca had grown up on tales of a veteran named Whitaker, but she had never believed they described a real person. Her father, a Vietnam veteran himself, spoke of Harold's kindness in hushed tones, how he brought letters and smiles to families whose sons' lives flickered out too soon. Now she hesitated, approaching cautiously. "Sir," she asked softly. Harold opened his eyes and managed a thin smile. "Morning, ma'am," he said, voice gentle but firm. "PFC Snyder, correct?" Rebecca blinked. "Yes, sir, but I thought you were retired." "I'm sorry about what happened at the gate." She gestured toward the booth where Park and Dominguez continued their morning routine. Harold's gaze drifted to the guard's, amusement flickering. "Don't apologize for their actions," he responded. "People forget too easily." Rebecca's cheeks flushed. "I see you every Veterans Day. I've heard the stories, but I never." She trailed off, uncertain how to convey the weight of her own unasked questions. Harold's eyes softened. "I did what I felt was right. My own headstones bore no epitaph. No one would speak their names if I didn't." He paused, gaze drifting to the falling snow. "We bury men in the cold ground. Their memories, if not tended, melt away like that snow." Rebecca fetched a folding chair and sat a respectful distance away. She glanced at the envelope pinned to Harold's side. "Can I ask what's inside?" He held her gaze for a moment, then nodded. "Letters, memories, really. To remind families their sons lived with laughter and fear, that they mattered." He raised a hand. "If you stay, I'll tell you about 1974. But I'll need silence." Rebecca straightened, hand over her heart. "I can do that, sir." Meanwhile, in the administrative office, Master Sergeant Caldwell watched a single photo pinned on a corkboard: Harold Whitaker receiving a Bronze Star in a ceremony held in his hometown 15 years ago. She exhaled slowly, fingers brushing her name tag absent-mindedly. She logged onto her computer, drafting an email to the base commander, requesting a review of entry protocols for veterans. Even as she typed, she recalled the vigilant eyes of Private Snyder as she approached Harold, recognition blossoming where mockery once reigned. Back beneath the maple, Rebecca listened intently as Harold described the explosion at Camp Carroll, how he had crawled through burning sand dunes to rescue 3 Marines trapped in a collapsed bunker. The snowflakes landed softly on Harold's shoulders, and his cane with its engraved cavalry emblem rested beside him on the ground. As he spoke, the earlier laughter of guards dissipated into memory, replaced by the hush of snowfall and the sincere curiosity of a young soldier seeking truth. By the time Harold finished Rebecca's notebook, brimmed with notes, dates, names, actions, each detail a thread weaving a tapestry long forgotten. She rose, brushing snow from her jacket sleeves. "Thank you, sir," she said, voice wavering with emotion. "I'll make sure they know." Harold nodded, once a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Remember them." He stood slowly, leaning on his cane, and walked toward the bench where his hat lay. With deliberate calm, he placed the envelope inside his coat pocket, straightened his fedora atop his head, and turned toward the guard booth. Through the veil of falling snow, Rebecca watched him walk back to face the waiting guards. No anger, only dignity etched into every careful step. From across the courtyard, the young officer in the black SUV observed, cell phone in hand, capturing a discreet photograph. He typed a message. "Do you recognize this veteran? Denied entry with invalid ID. Served Camp Carroll, Bronze Star, 74. The photograph, posted on the base's internal network, carried an unspoken truth beneath wrinkles, and silence lay a lifetime of service. And as Harold approached the guard booth once more, no mockery followed, only the soft crunch of snow underfoot and the promise of change stirring in the base's heartbeat. A sharp ring resonated through the guard booth's landline, silencing all chatter as if a bell tolled for attention. Lance Corporal Park and Corporal Dominguez jumped, exchanging puzzled glances. Master Sergeant Caldwell frowned, recognizing the number U.S. Joint Chiefs access code. She rose quickly, motioning for silence as the three gathered around the handset. "Good morning," Lance Corporal Park answered with forced cheer. "Lance Corporal, this is Colonel Margaret Rivers of the Joint Chiefs Special Recognition Office," said a crisp, authoritative voice. The booth fell silent, breaths held. "You are to cease any action regarding the man you turned away this morning, Sergeant Major Harold Whitaker, and grant him immediate access with full honors. Stand by." Park glanced over at Dominguez, confusion flashing across her face. "Sir, with all due respect, we immediate compliance," Corporal Colonel Rivers interrupted. "Sergeant Major Whitaker led Operation Winter Shield in 1970. His service record is classified under Directive 409A until 2030. You'll provide him entry with an honor guard effective now." Dominguez's stoic smirk vanished. "Yes, ma'am," he whispered, hands trembling, as he set the handset down. Master Sergeant Caldwell closed her eyes, nodding. "Sergeant Major Whitaker," she called out, voice steady but softer than before. "You have orders to enter with full honors." In an instant, the courtyard shifted. A black SUV idled at the gate, engine rumbling softly as Colonel Isaac Greer emerged, meticulous in pressed uniform and gleaming medals. Behind him, a lieutenant and two NCOs arranged themselves in dress greens, rifles slung at precise angles. Park and Dominguez snapped to attention, faces pale in newfound respect. Harold, still under the maple tree, straightened his parka and adjusted his fedora. He raised his right hand to his salute cane, tapping once against the pavement. Colonel Greer returned the salute with measured precision. For a heartbeat, recruits paused, brief drills on the lawn mechanics halted in mid-glance, and even the soft hum of generators faded, as if honoring Harold's presence. "Sergeant Major Whitaker, Colonel Greer," declared, voice carrying across the courtyard. "We honor your service from this moment forward. Please proceed." Harold nodded, once a gentle smile curving his lips. He tapped his cane against the asphalt, settling into a steady stride. One by one, soldiers in crisp uniforms lined the path from the gate to the central courtyard, each helmet polished, each boot laced tight, and formed a silent corridor of salute. The air held its breath as Harold walked at a deliberate pace, hat in hand, cane guiding each step. Recruits lined the path shoulder to shoulder, eyes fixed forward in reverence. Lieutenant Richards, still shaken by the abrupt directive, turned to his subordinates. "Form up," he barked, voice quavering between relief and embarrassment. Park and Dominguez snapped to attention, as if awakened from a careless slumber. Within moments, the honor detail had taken its place. Two soldiers on each side, rifles held at port arms, faces solemn. As Harold approached the central courtyard gate, Colonel Greer strode beside him. Their boots tapped in measured unison, echoing like a heartbeat across the stone plaza. The temperature hovered at 47 degrees, but a collective warmth enveloped every witness, in unspoken acknowledgement that respect had finally found its way. Crossing the threshold into the courtyard, Harold encountered the polished granite wall bearing the names of 38 soldiers who had fallen at Camp Carroll. Snow-dusted wreaths leaned against its base, ribbons fluttering gently as if eager to speak his name. He placed his hat on a small stand at the wall's foot, then retrieved the sealed envelope. The hush thickened, soldiers held their breaths, Civilians paused in their tasks. The wind shivered through nearby pines as though echoing the silent honor that filled the space. Harold knelt the cane laid beside him and pressed his fingertips against engraved names. James Anderson, Andrew Morris, Eric Martinez, and others whose lives had been extinguished in the freezing darkness of the Korean peninsula. He inserted the envelope into a brass holder fixed to the wall, a simple yet profound gesture that carried 5 decades of remembrance. The granite reflected a fractured silhouette. Harold's silhouette bowed yet unwavering. Colonel Greer approached and draped a folded American flag across Harold's shoulders, the red, white, and blue brushing his parka gently. On behalf of the United States Army and the families you've honored all these years, we present this flag to you, Greer said, voice unsteady with emotion. Harold rose slowly, hands resting atop the folded flag. He replaced his hat and picked up his cane, standing tall as a man reborn by recognition. Salutes echoed in crisp unison, rifles clicking at attention, while distant horns on base vehicles sounded a respectful chorus. Lieutenant Richards' eyes, glistening, mirrored the salute. Park and Dominguez stood at rigid attention, shame and reverence etched across their faces. Master Sergeant Caldwell wiped moisture from her eyes as she realized the magnitude of her own oversight. In that moment, Harold's quiet dignity transformed into a beacon of honor, commands and regulations converging to uplift a man whose service had been hidden in shadows for far too long. The courtyard's hush remained, but it was a hush born not of absence, but of profound respect. The knowledge that honor once withheld now resonated like an anthem across Lake Ridge Military Base. The central courtyard of Lake Ridge Military Base lay bathed in late morning light, the temperature hovering at 48 degrees Fahrenheit as a light dusting of snow formed a silent carpet. The polished granite memorial wall gleamed its engraved names, catching glints of sunlight like constellations frozen in stone. Every soldier, every civilian on duty seemed drawn toward the plaza, feeling the gravitational pull of an overdue tribute. Harold Whitaker stood beneath the maple tree that first witnessed his dismissal, now adorned with a wreath of red poppies and evergreen sprigs. Before him, an assembled formation of 200 personnel arranged themselves in an arc, officers in dress blues, NCOs in hatched army blues, and rank-and-file soldiers in crisp green fatigues. Each individual held a folded American flag, and their breath misted in the chilly air, forming a collective fog of anticipation. Colonel Isaac Greer stepped onto a small dais beside the memorial wall, saluting sharply. In soldierly unison, the formation responded. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the snapping of ribbons on dress uniforms. Then Greer lowered his hand and spoke, voice resonant as granite. Today we gather not only to honor the fallen, but to celebrate a man whose devotion to that cause has known no bounds, Sergeant Major Harold Whitaker. At those words, a crisp breeze swirled through the courtyard, rustling the folds of every uniform. Harold removed his parka, revealing the ribbons of his own service, Purple Heart Bronze Star, combat infantryman's badge pinned neatly above his left breast pocket. His worn dog tags clinked softly as he stepped onto the dais, cane tapping against the granite base. Greer presented Harold with a shadow box containing a replica bronze star, encased alongside a folded flag, and a photograph, a young Harold in camouflage fatigues, grinning beneath an earthen foxhole. Your actions during Operation Winter Shield in 1970 remain among the most courageous in our collective history. Today we formally award you the Silver Star for gallantry, belated but not forgotten. Harold accepted the medal with quiet solemnity, his eyes glistening as he pinned it to his parka. Murmurs rippled across the courtyard, families, new recruits, and seasoned officers all watching as history stitched itself back together. One by one, soldiers stepped forward to salute, voices echoing. Thank you for your service, sir. Lieutenant Caleb Richards approached, kneeling in crisp precision. I, on behalf of every soldier I command, offer my deepest apologies, sir, for my disregard this morning. His voice trembled. Park and Dominguez mirrored the gesture behind him, tears glinting in their eyes beneath crisp caps. Harold inclined his head once, offering a measured nod. Learn from today, Lieutenant, he replied, voice steady. Remember that dignity does not expire with old credentials, but endures in every act of respect. Harold turned toward the memorial wall and retrieved the envelope he had placed there earlier. He knelt once more, drawing a deep breath. These letters, he began, voice firm, were written to ensure no soldier's sacrifice was ever lost to time. He placed the envelope carefully at the wall's base, aligning it with earlier offerings. The formation lowered their rifles. The hush deepened. A lone trumpet call rose from the edge of the courtyard, soft, mournful, then resolute, announcing taps. Each soldier's head bowed, rifles slung at their sides. The echo of the final note lingered, as if suspended in air, honoring those who could no longer hear its lament. Harold stood, replaced his hat, and leaned on his cane. Colonel Greer stepped forward, handing him a folded flag that Harold accepted with both hands, pressing it against his chest. "May this flag remind us that every life given in service deserves our steadfast remembrance," Greer said. In that moment, warmth crept into the courtyard, despite the chill and invisible flame kindled by collective gratitude. Soldiers wiped tears from their eyes. Civilians laid hand to heart in quiet salute. As Harold descended from the dais, recruits parted like a sea of reverence, each mindful footstep, a testament to a promise kept. At the edge of the plaza, Private First Class Rebecca Snyder held her father's photograph, a Marine who fell in the Gulf War. She placed a single red poppy beneath the memorial wall, eyes fixed on Harold. The wisdom of his sacrifice rippled through her, that memory once invoked bore infinite power. As the ceremony concluded, the soldiers marched away in soft order, rifles, muffled by canvas, leaving behind a hush enriched by reverence. Colonel Greer clasped Harold's arm. "Your legacy is secure, Sergeant Major," he murmured. Harold nodded, tip of his fedora casting a gentle shadow. "Only of those who follow us remember, Colonel." The final echo of boots faded across the courtyard, but the resonance of honor, the notes of taps, the crackle of folded flags, the flicker of poppies, remained. In the heart of Lake Ridge, military base respect had been rewoven into its very foundation. The maple overhead shivered in approval, as though granting its own silent salute to a man who had guided a generation from the shadows into the light. That evening, a gathering convened inside the base's historic lecture hall, a vaulted space with rows of wooden pew-style benches, each polished from decades of use. Rough-hewn beams lined the ceiling, bearing muted echoes of previous addresses. Nearly 300 personnel, cadets, NCOs, officers, and civilian staff filled the hall, their chatter subdued by anticipation. The temperature inside hovered at a comfortable 68 degrees Fahrenheit, as Sergeant Major Harold Whitaker settled into a front-row seat, the folded silver star gleaming at his chest. Colonel Isaac Greer ascended the podium and tapped the microphone. "Tonight we continue the ceremony of recognition," he announced, voice steady. "But more importantly, we gather to carry forward a tradition of remembrance embodied by Sergeant Major Whitaker. He has asked to share with you why he wrote Letters for the Fallen, how these stories forged a bridge between service and memory." Harold rose slowly, stepping forward with measured grace. Warm light fell across his face, illuminating eyes that had once surveyed jungles and now surveyed new soldiers, eager for wisdom. He cleared his throat. "When I first wrote a letter for Private Robert Jenkins after the November siege at Camp Carroll, I did so for one reason: his name mattered." He paused, scanning the rows of faces, some young enough to post on social media today, others nearing retirement, all united by purpose. In those days, he continued, telephones were scarce on the front lines. Families waited weeks for word. "I thought if I could fill in the details, how Robert used to sing ballads around the campfire, how he saved a pup the locals kept as a mascot, then his parents would know he was more than a casualty number. He was a son, a friend, a man with laughter." A hush settled on the room, broken only by the distant hum of heating vents. Harold reached into his jacket pocket, withdrawing a weathered envelope marked in blue ink, "Jody Matthews." "Jody was 19, barely older than some of you," he said, lifting the letter so light from its decades-long journey that it trembled between his fingers. "He saved 2 medics during Operation Freedom Run in '89. When he fell, the medics carried him back, just one rifle shot separating life from death. His family lived in a farmhouse in Iowa. When they received my letter nearly 2 years later, they'd long since planted a rose bush in his memory. They wrote back to tell me how every summer that bush blooms a little brighter, reminding them that Jody's courage still smelled like home." Eyes glistened across the auditorium. Lance Corporal Jenna Park dabbed at hers. Somewhere near the back, Corporal Miguel Dominguez crossed his arms, gaze unwavering, as if letting Harold's words settle like snow onto an old stone. "When I wrote to families," Harold said, voice steady, "I never asked for thanks. I simply wanted their sons to live on in stories. That's why I did not mail one final letter before tonight. It was meant for the families of soldiers. I couldn't save those who passed before I could write it all. But the knowledge that their loved ones would forever lack a spoken farewell weighed too heavily. So I entrusted that letter to my niece, asking her to deliver it when I no longer could." He placed for the ones I couldn't save on the podium. "That letter holds names of 6 young men lost in a mountain ambush: Jones, Baker, Nguyen, Morales, Patel, and Simmons. Each name etched in my memory because I led them into that ravine. I survived, they did not. My regret is not having spoken their names to the family sooner." Captain Caleb Richards rose from his seat, holding aloft multiple envelopes. "Sergeant Major," he said, voice thick, "on behalf of Lake Ridge Military Base and the Department of Defense, we present these letters to the families named herein. We've located them, and their doors will open this Veterans Day to a message they thought never came." Harold nodded, eyes moist. He returned to his seat, and as Richards and a team of volunteers filed out to deliver letters, he remained standing a moment longer, shoulders squared, as though unable to fully settle back onto the pew. The weight of sorrow, closure, and gratitude pulsed through him. Colonel Greer resumed his place at the podium. Therefore, starting tomorrow, each new recruit arriving at Lake Ridge Military Base will learn of a soldier they might never have known existed, those whose names Harold Whitaker cherished. We will read aloud one letter each ceremony so that every soldier on this base, in this company, and in this nation knows that honor persists when we remember. Applause rose slow and reverent as families in the audience, some wearing uniform, others in casual attire, stood to receive their sons' stories. In the back row, Private First Class Rebecca Snyder snapped a photo meant for her father's widow, ensuring that Jody Matthews' family knew how their son's memory had become a beacon. After the ceremony, small groups lingered, exchanging whispered reflections. Master Sergeant Caldwell approached Harold. "I'm sorry for my earlier judgment," she said, voice sincere. "You taught me that from now on I will look deeper." Harold offered a gentle nod. "It's never too late to see." As the hall emptied and evening shadows lengthened, a single envelope remained on the podium for the ones I couldn't save. It glowed in the soft lamplight, a reminder that stories once kept silent now had voices. Outside, the maple silhouette stood against the twilight sky, its branches reaching upward, as though to embrace every man and woman who carried the legacy of remembrance forward. 1 year later, the pre-dawn sky over Briarwood, Ohio, held a violet hue that promised the first rays of a new Veterans Day. The thermometer read 38 degrees Fahrenheit, and an early fog curled along the gravel drive leading to Harold Whitaker's home. The front window glowed softly with lamplight, and a single rocking chair sat empty on the porch, a silent testament to a man who no longer took his morning vigil beneath the oak. Inside, a small group gathered Harold's niece Emily Whitaker, wearing her late uncle's silver star on her lapel. Colonel Isaac Greer, now retired but present in dress blues, Captain Caleb Richards, polished and upright, and Private First Class Rebecca Snyder, rifle pressed lightly against her side in honor guard formation. They stood before a simple wooden table draped with a deep blue cloth. On it rested Harold's final letter, sealed and addressed, "For the families of the 6 fallen Veterans Day 2025, and beside it his polished cane and burgundy fedora. Emily lifted Harold's favorite coffee mug, still warm, as though he had just put it down and toasted to the gathered. "He always insisted on starting the morning with fresh grounds," she said, voice breaking. "So in his memory, I invite each of you to place something on this table that symbolizes what honor means to you." Colonel Greer stepped forward and placed a small bronze plaque engraved "Harold Whitaker Gate, where respect meets memory." His voice trembled. At Lake Ridge Military Base, the new north entrance bears his name. Each recruit salutes it upon arrival, reminding themselves that a single soldier's dignity can change history. Captain Richards followed, placing Harold's Bronze Star ribbon box on the table. "I deliver letters every Veterans Day now," he said softly. "First-hand stories of those we lost. It's become our base's tradition. Because of him, we realize that a letter can keep a life alive." Rebecca Snyder set a single red poppy on the table. "I carry a rose from my own mother's garden," she added, retrieving a pressed bloom from her pocket. "My father, Marine Gunnery Sergeant David Snyder, cannot be here today. He passed away last spring. But because of Harold's letters, I know my father's courage is remembered. I'm here to keep that promise." Emily nodded, tears brimming, as she placed Harold's silver star beside the others. "My uncle didn't seek recognition," she said. "So when he died peacefully at 89, there were no news bulletins, just a sealed envelope on his desk, for the ones I couldn't save. Today I will deliver that final letter to those 6 families." She held the envelope high. "In a few hours, these letters will leave my hands and travel to Cleveland, Chicago, Indianapolis, Minneapolis, and beyond. Each will be opened by someone who never thought they'd hear from a soldier who walked alongside their son." Outside, as dawn light broke through mist, a convoy approached Department of Defense vehicles, carrying volunteers ready to deliver the final messages. Soldiers in dress uniforms snapped to attention as they passed Emily's home, saluting the porch where Harold's symbols lay. The sky brightened, revealing crisp autumn colors of reds and golds. Emily stepped onto the porch and watched Colonel Greer's SUV depart, flag rippling in the wind. She clutched Harold's hat to her chest. "Honor endures," she whispered, recalling his final words. Beneath her breath, she added, "Because we remember." In the weeks that followed, Lake Ridge Military Base's North Gate plaque was unveiled, "Harold Whitaker, Gate where respect meets memory." Every new recruit passing through was told Harold's story of letters written, lives saved, and honor sustained when credentials failed. The gate became more than a portal, it was a promise that the fallen would never be forgotten. Meanwhile, letters arrived at 6 separate households hand-delivered by volunteers who had known Harold only as a silhouette beneath an old oak. Each recipient found in the final envelope a narrative of courage, a photograph of their son in uniform, and the closing line Harold had written, "Let not the silence swallow their names. Speak them always." Families gathered to read those words, tears mingling with a quiet smile. In living rooms from Ohio to Minnesota, children learned of uncles, fathers, brothers they never met, finding pride in stories they now held close. Back at Lake Ridge, recruits stood at formation each morning and saluted the Harold Whitaker Gate. The maple under which Harold once prayed now bore a bronze marker at its base. In memory of Sergeant Major Harold Whitaker, his voice carried the names of the fallen. Now his legacy carries ours. Years later, when a cold November wind tousled the leaves along the perimeter road, an older Captain Richards, now a colonel, led a small group of recruits beneath the newly renamed gate. "This entrance stands as a reminder," he said, voice echoing in frost-laden air, "that dignity needs no credentials. It lives whenever a single soul chooses to remember." He paused, allowing the recruits to absorb each word. And so Harold Whitaker's story continued, not confined to hushed anecdotes, but woven into the daily rhythms of a base and families across America. For as long as the gate stood, honor endured. And every November, when snowflakes drifted through the air and veterans gathered to stand tall beneath the maple's branches, one name rose above the rest, spoken, remembered, and carried forward by hearts who refused to let silence prevail. Because some warriors fight battles unseen, some carry legacies etched in quiet courage, and some, like Harold Whitaker, leave behind a message that echoes far beyond stone and bronze. Honor those who served. Speak the names of the fallen. Never let them fade.